about to say, I think, is in some ways been confirmed this morning by a couple of things that already happened. And so I want to give you maybe a preview, a trailer preview of what I'm going to say by reviewing what's already happened. One is that the song, our chalice lighting song, was really amazing. And I could say nothing better than the lesson that came through that activity. I'll try, but I will not succeed. The other thing is, so it feels like something is at work, is what I'm implying. The other thing I want to let you know is the song Hallelujah. It was written by Leonard Cohen, but not made famous by Leonard Cohen. In fact, I find Leonard Cohen's version to be barely listenable. He and his Cassio tone don't participate with my ears very well. The story of that song is he wrote it many, many years ago, and it did not get famous at all. It was obscure. But then, I forgot his name, and I forgot exactly where he was, but I think it may have been like a bassist for the Velvet Underground. I might be making that up, but it's something like that. Discovered it, and released a solo album, which went nowhere. Sold nothing. And it wasn't even a featured song on the album, so nobody's heard. This is like 10 years later. So time is stretching and going on, and finally, one day, a remarkable, I hate that word, of course it's remarkable, I'm saying it, an astounding musician and singer named Jeff Buckley was asked to dog sit a friend's house, went over there, was coming through the record collection of this friend, found this album that he had never heard of by this Velvet Underground bassist. He'd never heard of it because nobody had ever heard of it. He pulled it out and heard that song, and then he recorded it, and it became an anthem that we will never forget. So the idea there, I think, is that expressions of the divine will find a way. And that we may not be in as much control of that as we think. Having said that, and we'll see, maybe that will bear out what I'm about to say, maybe not, but I will tell you that what I'm about to say, some of you will not like. We are going to reflect on community and how to sustain it. We are going to talk about love and how to make it, or how to cultivate it, anyway. We are going to talk about reconciliation, how to bring it about. First things first, foundation, the ground, the place we start, the place we want. First, I want to tell you a story. Although it doesn't have a beginning or middle, or it has a beginning, but not really a middle or an end, so I don't know if it's a story. But once upon a time, I had the very rewarding practice, I think I've shared with you before, that I would go for a hike in the mountains prior to writing a sermon. This is when I did my internship in Utah, and the Wasatch foothills were right outside the door practically. And so I would determine a topic before I went on the trail and then go hiking. And as I walked, if I didn't force it, the world would speak to me in sensual metaphors with messages entirely applicable to the upcoming sermon. So this was awesome. It was helpful. It was connective. It felt confirming. It felt like magic. Of course, it wasn't magic. The sermon subject determined my frame of reference. Like a pair of colored goggles, it affected what I saw. And that's maybe more narcissistic than connected. Of course, whatever the revelation to protect against narcissism, I would test in community, much as I'm doing right now, and would also test it in my life and in practice soon thereafter. And that's the blessing of community. Now, as to the blessing of the world, well, as good as it felt, I knew it wasn't like the world was intentionally moving me or an arrangement of trees to communicate with me. I mean, I don't believe that meaning is inherent in the world. I believe that humans create meaning via relationship, and we all do this. We see the world through the goggles of culture, education, and desire. And while that is less than mystical, and it feels less like the world is concerned in some way with me, it makes sense and is still a valuable notion that we create meaning. But something has shifted for me that changes how I think about those books. And this is how the shift came about. Over the last month, on a single day, one day, there came to me identical propositions from two seemingly unrelated sources. And given that this proposition each time spoke to me so thoroughly and seated so deeply in my mind, it felt like an invitation in triplicate. Now, we often say, we cheeky atheist-ish people, that when something like that happens, the universe is talking. Where the universe is a rather self-delusionally secular, non-committal, and cowardly way of saying, God. You know of what I speak. But damn it, two sources saying the same thing on a single day? The universe seemed to be talking. So I must attend to this thought. Or maybe it was like my old pre-sermon hikes. Maybe I had pre-constructed my frame of reference, an interest that drew me to each of these seemingly separate sources, and on a subconscious level I was engaging with these two separate sources precisely because I yearned for exactly such a proposition to tweak my nose. Maybe I was asking for it, and I suppose to some degree I was. But then the proposition itself made me reconsider that. The proposition finally asks, are you the framer or the framed? Or is there even a distinction? So what was the proposition? It was this: that matter comes from consciousness. Consciousness generates matter. Not my consciousness, a primordial consciousness, a prime. Now, as children of the Enlightenment, this is a preposterous notion. We may have our spiritual feelings and experiences, but we are effectively materialistic first. Am I right? I have long been moved to a state of wonder by the existence of consciousness, though. And before that, of life. And before that, of anything at all. I call these bomb-hit questions, which both impugns and dates me, because bombs are so last century. But why is there something as opposed to nothing? And how did biology arise from geology? And how did consciousness then arise from that life that came from non-life that has no explanation for its very existence? It's weird. But as I thought on it, it occurred to me that it is no more preposterous for matter to come from consciousness than it is for consciousness to come from matter. Moreover, it is necessarily true, I think, that at least the conditions for consciousness are in some way inherent in matter, at least. Otherwise, it could not exist. Consciousness could not exist. And that means that matter, which is to say existence, and at least the conditions for consciousness are co-eval. They simultaneously manifest from the beginning and are perhaps interdependent. So, two separate sources asking me this question. It blew my mind, and it would, as I pursue it, I'm not sure if I'm convinced yet, but I'm very entertained by the notion. And it would be a massive shift to my thinking, because it means that the conditions for consciousness, and perhaps consciousness itself, have always, and possibly, if anywhere, then everywhere, existed. And maybe pre-existed. So, this opens the bizarre, to some of us, possibility that all matter is rife with consciousness. Unaware of it, perhaps, but permeated by it nonetheless. That there is a consciousness underlying existence, suffusing every electron and quark, and if consistent with itself, then encompassing everything. That through us becomes aware of its interactions, because consciousness and awareness might be separate things. Perhaps the ground of being is consciousness itself, and is conscious, if perhaps not aware of it, until its tools of awareness, that is us, come along. Each of us a reflection of the divine, reflecting on the divine. So I guess that would qualify as inherent worth connected in a web of existence. After all, we are a function of the cosmos as much as a tree or a supernova. Our awareness, consciousness, and meaning-making are products of the universe that makes all the other things that we find meaning in. So it is difficult now, looking back on those pre-sermon hikes, to take credit for insinuating the world with meaning, as if there was a distinction between the three, between the world and meaning and I. I, a product of eons in a moment, met a raven nesting in a twisted tree, also a product of eons in a moment. And in that meeting, significance generated. Did I, by my sermon subject, manufacture the frame of reference, the goggles, or am I a manifestation of the frame? And if that's the case, then the world was indeed moving to express itself, if in nothing else but in me. And I was more a witness than an architect, more translator than author, if even that. And that feels interesting. It feels good. It feels like the world just might be family. And that connection with it isn't a negotiation, but an embrace. Not without irony, mind you. For the very thing that allows us to sense connection, which is perhaps our function in the universe, the very thing that allows us to sense connection, our awareness, our consciousness, also generates a sense of self and its symptom, the ego. And ego prevents us from experiencing the underlying unity that it prevents us from experiencing being one with everything. And so it is that every religious tradition, I think, has a central component, some means of temporarily dismissing the ego. Be it identification with a storied hero, meditative practices, ingested substances, or services performed. Unitarian Universalists are deficient in this regard. We have positively freed ourselves from dogmas and doctrines that strangled the original intent of those practices in other faiths, but we have freed ourselves into nothing. Now that may change. I think it is changing. I certainly hope it changes. Think about it a little. What methods do we have to erase ego? Sanctified, supported. At the moment, we really only have one that I can think of. And that one will have to get us through until we can imagine others. That one is each other. Our community. The unity manifests in the way that we treat one another. And it's not that we're seeking perfection in our behavior or in that of others. Our reactive egos make that impossible. But we can provide opportunities. We can see opportunities. And in each other and in ourselves, we are reaching out to and from and as something beautiful and bigger than us. We are reaching out beyond our egos and helping each other to do so. It is a dance. Some of you have been dancing together on Monday mornings. Maybe you can understand the metaphor even better than I. That same studio, the Center for Conscious Movement, had a performance last night, and my girls were in it. There's 7. And this was their first dance performance, and they were amazing. The whole thing was amazing. Beautiful bodies, moving beautifully. And imperfect bodies, moving imperfectly. Expressing something wordless and deep. There was a 4-foot wide, 40-foot long blue silk cloth that many of the dancers used in lovely, flowing, constricting, amazing ways. They tangled themselves up and freed themselves from it. They made it look like water. They made shapes, they made walls, they made bridges. They made connections. The girls got to use it too. It was part of their dance. And I was at one of the rehearsals recently, and, they would gather together to practice. It says on my notes here, significant look at the congregation. For the dance, if you catch my meaning. And they were all to hold on to and dance with this material. They were participating with it and communicating through it and making something beautiful. It was like community in many ways. And it was even supposed to do wonderful things. But at this rehearsal, it wasn't going well. They were kind of doing their own thing and fighting over it. Now, Felice, their instructor, quickly understood what was happening. And this is what she said to my brothers. She said, this moment cannot be about what you each want to do with the scarf. Because if you each get attached to it and to what you want to do with it, it won't work. In fact, this dance isn't even about the scarf. If it's about the scarf, it will not work. She didn't say it that mean. This dance, she says, is about dancing. Now, Jesus did not explain his parables, and look what happened to him. So let me be clear. In the story, our community is the scarf. And while community is the one thing that we have that challenges us to let down our egos, we are not even about our community or the products of our community. We are about aspiring to connect to the sacred, to the dance of consciousness. We do that through community, but without centering that aspiration, without letting that aspiration guide and inform our interactions with one another, especially when we are at odds over the shape of a scarf. Without that bigger than us ego-dispelling pole star, our community will not work. Without love as our guide, that's what connection feels like. That's what being embraced by whatever kind of consciousness, be it primordial or generated by you, that's what that feels like. Love. We proceed, we dance only with love as our guide. Before any action, before any response, remember our practice. Remember breathing. Remember love as our guide. I'll try it too. And when I say things like that, you all might think that I'm talking about them, and you know who they are, whoever they are for you. But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about us. All of us. Imperfect expressions of beauty. Helping each other to recognize our essential connection through one another, through the world, to our source. Helping each other to find a way home. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. To bless this hour with your voices as we sing our responsive hymn. 1023. In the soft back, building for